The Velthari Dominion had watched humanity spread across the stars for 30 years. They observed these strange creatures building cities on distant worlds, farming planets that had been empty for millions of years, and trading with any species willing to do business. The Velthari saw humans shake hands with enemies and sign peace treaties with rivals. They saw humans choose words over weapons at every opportunity. To the Velthari High Council, this was not wisdom. This was weakness. Admiral Kethris stood on the command deck of his massive flagship, the Eternal Claw. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his yellow eyes reflected the light of distant stars. Behind him, 40 warships waited in formation, their weapons charged and ready. Before him, floating in the darkness of space, was a blue and green world called New Eden. New Eden was humanity's largest farming colony. 12 million people lived there, growing food that fed a dozen other human worlds. The planet had rolling hills covered in wheat, vast orchards heavy with fruit, and cities made of glass that sparkled in the sunlight. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It had almost no defenses. "Begin the bombardment," Kethros ordered. His voice was cold and empty of feeling. Green plasma fell from the sky like rain made of fire. The first shots hit the capital city, turning buildings into dust and ash in seconds. People ran through streets that melted beneath their feet. Mothers grabbed their children and searched for shelter that did not exist. Fathers stood in doorways, staring up at the burning sky. Unable to understand what was happening, the Colonial Defense Force launched everything they had. 6 old frigates, designed more for police work than real combat, rose to meet the Velthari Armada. They fought bravely. They fought hopelessly. Kethris watched them burn, one after another, swatted from the sky like insects. "Too easy," his second command said. "They are weaker than we thought." Kethris nodded slowly. "Spread the word to the fleet. We will take 3 more colonies before they can respond. By the time they ask for peace, we will own half their territory." On Earth, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, a young man named Danny Vance sat at his communication station. He was 23 years old, fresh out of training, and he had never expected to see real combat in his lifetime. Humans had been at peace for 200 years. War was something from history books. Then the distress signal arrived. Danny's hands shook as he listened. To the screaming voices from New Eden, he heard explosions in the background. He heard children crying. He heard a woman begging someone to help them. Please help them. The sky was on fire and everyone was dying. He forwarded the signal to his superiors. Within an hour, every screen on Earth showed the same footage. Cameras on New Eden had captured everything before the communications tower fell. The world watched Velthari ships rain death upon innocent people. They watched cities crumble. They watched millions die. President Maria Santos stood in her office, watching the footage play again and again. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, but those eyes were not kind anymore. Something cold had taken root behind them. Something old and patient and terrible. That evening, she addressed humanity. Every human on every world stopped what they were doing to listen. "Today, the Velthari Dominion murdered 12 million of our people," she began. Her voice was steady, but there was steel underneath the words. "They attacked farmers. They killed teachers and doctors and children. They bombed schools and hospitals and homes." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "The Velthari believe we are weak. They have watched us choose peace for 2 centuries, and they have decided that this makes us prey." She leaned forward, and the camera captured the fury in her eyes. "They are wrong. They are so terribly, terribly wrong." Across human space, people listened with clenched fists and tear-stained faces. "We did not want this war," Santos continued. "We have spent 200 years building a civilization based on cooperation and kindness. We have extended our hands in friendship to every species we have met. We have chosen peace because we know the cost of war." Her voice hardened. "But do not mistake our patience for weakness. Do not confuse our mercy with inability. Humanity remembers what it once was. We remember the wars we fought among ourselves before we reached the stars. We remember the weapons we built, the tactics we developed, the fury we unleashed upon our own brothers and sisters." She stood straighter. We chose to leave that behind. We chose to be better. But choice is not the same as incapability. The Velthari have made a terrible mistake. They have attacked our children. They have burned our homes. They have awakened something that we have worked very hard to keep sleeping. On military bases across human territory, officers opened sealed files marked with the highest security classifications. They read orders that had been written generations ago, preparing for a day that everyone hoped would never come. On Luna, massive doors that had been closed for a century began to grind open. On Titan, underground hangars that did not appear on any official map hummed to life. On Mars, factories that had been producing farming equipment quietly switched to different production lines. President Santos finished her address with words that would be remembered for centuries. To the people of the Velthari Dominion, I say this: you have made your choice. Now you will face the consequences. You wanted to see what humanity is capable of. You wanted to test the soft creatures who farm planets and sign treaties. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Congratulations. You are about to find out. In homes across human space, parents held their children close. Soldiers reported for duty. Engineers began working shifts that would not end for months. A civilization that had been devoted to peace began the grim work of preparing for war. And deep in the heart of human territory, in places hidden from all maps and records, ships began to wake. These were not the trade vessels and passenger liners that the galaxy had come to associate with humanity. These were something else entirely. Something built in secret. Something maintained in darkness. Something that had waited for generations for a threat. Worthy of its awakening, the Velthari had attacked humans expecting an easy victory. They expected surrender within weeks. They expected to divide human territory among themselves and add another conquered species to their empire. They had no idea what they had done. The beast was awake now, and it was hungry. Commander Lisa Grant had served in the Navy for 15 years. Most of that time was spent behind a desk on Luna Base, processing paperwork and managing supply schedules. She had joined the military because she wanted to protect people. But the truth was that there had been nothing to protect them from. Humanity was at peace. The Navy was more like a Coast Guard than an actual fighting force, or so she had believed. Now, she stood in a massive underground hangar beneath the frozen surface of Titan, and everything she thought she knew about humanity was falling apart around her. The ships before her were monsters. There was no other word for them. They were massive, covered in weapons that bristled from every surface like the spines of some angry creature. They were painted black, designed to disappear into the darkness of space. They looked nothing like the bright, friendly vessels that carried passengers and cargo between human worlds. "The Nemesis-class dreadnoughts," said a voice behind her. 20 of them. Each one carries enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Lisa turned to find an old man walking toward her. He had white hair, a weathered face, and a limp in his left leg. His uniform was simple, but the medals on his chest told stories that made Lisa's blood run cold. This was Admiral Henry Cole, a man whose service record was more classified information than actual text. "I did not know these existed," Lisa admitted. "That was the point," Cole replied. He stopped beside her and looked up at the nearest dreadnought. After the last war, 300 years ago, humanity made a decision. We would pursue peace. We would become merchants and diplomats and scientists. We would put away the weapons of our past and try to be good neighbors in the galaxy. He paused. But we are not stupid. We knew that peace is fragile. We knew that someday someone might mistake our kindness for weakness. So we built these ships in secret. We trained crews in hidden facilities. We developed weapons that officially do not exist. He smiled sadly. We hoped we would never need them. Lisa looked at the fleet stretched out before her. 20 dreadnoughts, each one larger than anything she had ever seen. 40 heavy cruisers bristling with missile tubes. 100 destroyers designed for speed and aggression. And at the center of the formation, a ship so enormous that it seemed to bend the light around it. "The Un's Retribution," Cole said, following her gaze. "Flagship of the Ghost Fleet. She has been waiting here for 200 years for a day like this. How did we keep this secret? Lisa asked. How did no one know? The crews live here. They train here. They die here. Their families believe they work in mining operations or research stations. The resources come from black budgets that not even most government officials know about. Cole's voice was heavy. Keeping this secret has cost us more than you can imagine. But today, it will save us. Lisa thought about the footage from New Eden. She thought about the children running through burning streets. She thought about her own niece, only 5 years old, living on a colony not far from Valkyrie space. What do you need me to do? She asked. Cole handed her a datapad. You are now the captain of the Nemesis. Your crew has been training for this moment their entire lives. They know their jobs better than any crew in human history. He met her eyes. Your job is to lead them into battle and bring them home alive. And the Valkyrie. Make them regret every decision that led them to this moment. Across human space, the mobilization continued. On Earth, factories that had produced cars and appliances for decades switched to military production. Assembly lines that had been making kitchen equipment began stamping out rifle parts. Engineers who had designed household robots started working on combat drones. The reserves were called up. Men and women who had served years ago, who had thought their military days were long behind them, received messages telling them to report for duty. They left their families with tight hugs and whispered promises to come home safe. On colony worlds, civilians began training programs. Farmers learned basic combat skills. Teachers studied first aid. Shop owners practiced evacuation procedures. Everyone understood that this war would touch every corner of human society. The Valkyrie continued their advance. Unaware of what was building against them, they attacked 3 more colonies in the weeks following New Eden. Each time, they expected humanity to break, to beg for peace, to offer whatever the Valkyrie demanded in exchange for survival. Instead, they got silence. The human diplomats stopped responding to messages. Human trade ships disappeared from Valkyrie ports. The chatter on human communication channels, which the Valkyrie had been monitoring for years, went quiet. On the Eternal Claw, Kethris reviewed his reports with growing unease. Something was wrong. Conquered species did not behave like this. They screamed and cried and pleaded. They did not simply go silent. Perhaps they are in chaos, his second in command suggested. Perhaps their government has collapsed under the stress. Perhaps, Kethris said, but he did not believe it. Deep in human territory, the Ghost Fleet completed its preparations. Crews who had spent their entire lives training in secret ran final checks on weapons that had never been fired in anger. Pilots climbed into fighters that had only ever flown in simulations. Engineers tested engines that had been maintained for generations. Waiting for this moment, Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the Retribution and looked at the tactical display showing Valkyrie positions across the border. All ships, he said quietly. Prepare to move out. 20 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, 100 destroyers, and behind them, more ships were coming every day as the full might of humanity's hidden. Military began to gather. The Valkyrie had attacked farmers and children. They had burned peaceful colonies. They had killed 12 million people who had never wanted anything except to live quiet, lives among the stars. Now the wolves were coming, and they remembered everything. Lisa Grant sat in the captain's chair of the Nemesis, feeling the ship hum around her like a living thing, eager for battle. She thought about her niece. She thought about the children of New Eden. She thought about all the people who had died because the Valkyrie had mistaken peace for weakness. All stations report ready, her first officer announced. Lisa nodded slowly. Then let us teach them what humanity really is. The Ghost Fleet moved into hyperspace, leaving Titan behind. Ahead of them lay Valkyrie territory. Ahead of them lay war. Behind them, more ships followed. And more and more. The beast was fully awake now, and it was marching toward those who had disturbed its sleep. Kethris stood on the bridge of the Eternal Claw, studying the map of his conquests with growing satisfaction. For human colonies now belonged to the Velthari Dominion. Millions of humans were dead or captured. The Great Expansion was proceeding exactly as planned. The High Council had already begun dividing the territories they would claim once humanity surrendered. They argued over farming worlds and mining rights, over which families would govern the new provinces. Victory seemed certain. Then the reports stopped coming. The first sign of trouble came from Korak Station, a massive supply depot near the border of Velthari space. The station had been transmitting routine updates every 6 hours for as long as anyone could remember. Then, without warning, it went silent. Kethra sent a patrol ship to investigate. The ship arrived at Korak Station 3 days later. What they found made no sense. The station was gone. Not damaged. Not abandoned. Gone. In its place was a field of debris, twisted metal and frozen bodies drifting through space. The patrol ship searched for survivors. There were none. They searched for any sign of what had happened. There was nothing. Just destruction so complete that it seemed almost personal. Perhaps an accident, his advisors suggested. An explosion in the fuel storage. Kethris wanted to believe this. He ordered increased patrols along the border and continued with his plans. Then the frontier outposts began to disappear. Outpost 7 went silent on a Tuesday. Outpost 12 stopped responding on Friday. By the following week, 6 more outposts had vanished. Patrol ships sent to investigate found the same thing every time: debris, bodies, and silence. Something was out there. Something was hunting them. Kethris gathered his commanders for an emergency meeting. The map before them showed the border between Velthari and human space. Red markers indicated destroyed outposts. There were too many red markers. "We are being attacked," one commander said. "But by what? Our sensors detect nothing. Our ships see nothing. Whatever is doing this appears from nowhere and vanishes without a trace." "Impossible," another commander argued. "No species has such technology. The humans certainly do not. We have studied them for decades. They have merchants and passenger ships, not weapons capable of this destruction." "Then explain what is happening," the first commander demanded. No one could. On the eternal claw. Kethris paced his private quarters, trying to understand. He had built his career on understanding enemies, on predicting their movements, on staying 3 steps ahead. But this enemy made no sense. They struck without warning and disappeared without a trace. They targeted military installations with perfect precision. They left no survivors to report what they had seen. The following day, his second-in-command brought news that changed everything. "You have captured a human pilot," the officer reported. "Her fighter was damaged in a skirmish near the Velo system. She survived." Kethris ordered the pilot brought to him immediately. The human was small, even by human standards. She had short brown hair and a face covered in dried blood from a wound on her forehead. Her flight suit was torn and dirty. She looked broken, defeated, harmless. Her name, according to the identification tags around her neck, was Grace Murphy, Lieutenant, United Nations Space Command. Kethris circled her slowly, studying her the way a predator studies wounded prey. "Your people are dying," he told her through the translator device. "Your colonies burn. Your ships are being destroyed one by one. Tell me what forces are attacking my outposts, and I will make your death quick and painless." Grace Murphy looked up at him. She was half his size, injured, captured, completely at his mercy. She should have been terrified. She should have been begging. Instead, she smiled. "You really do not understand, do you?" she said. "You attacked New Eden. You killed 12 million people. Farmers, teachers, children who never hurt anyone." Her voice cracked slightly. "My little sister was on New Eden. Her name was Sophie. She was 7 years old. She wanted to be a pilot like me." "Your sentiment is noted," Kethra said coldly. "Now tell me about your fleet." "There is something you need to understand about humans," Grace continued, as if he had not spoken. "We are not warriors by nature. We spent 200 years trying to be peaceful. We built farms instead of fortresses. We trained doctors instead of soldiers. We wanted so badly to be good," she laughed, and there was something broken in the sound. But we remember, Admiral, deep down in our blood and our bones, we remember what we used to be. Before we reached the stars. Before we chose peace. We remember the wars we fought. We remember the weapons we built. We remember what we are capable of when someone threatens our families. You are trying to frighten me with stories, Kethra said. The humans I have seen are weak. They die easily. The humans you have seen are the ones we let you see, Grace replied. The kind ones. The gentle ones. The ones who believed that maybe, just maybe, the universe could be better than it is. Her smile faded. You killed them. And now you get to meet the others. An alarm suddenly blared throughout the ship. Kethris turned to see his tactical officer staring at the display screen, his face twisted with fear. Admiral, the officer whispered. Ships. Human ships. They just appeared at the edge of the system. How many? The officer's hands trembled as he worked the controls. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Our sensors cannot get an accurate count. Kethris strode to the display screen and felt his blood turn cold. The scanner showed a wall of contacts approaching the Velthari fleet. These were not the small friendly ships that humans used for trade. These were warships, massive and dark and bristling with weapons. They moved in perfect formation, like a pack of predators closing in on prey. Behind him, Grace Murphy began to laugh. It was not the laugh of a defeated prisoner. It was the laugh of someone who knew exactly what was coming. You wanted to know what was destroying your outposts, she said. There's your answer. Those are the wolves, Admiral, and they are very, very hungry. Kethras watched the human fleet approach and understood for the first time the terrible mistake he had made. He had attacked peaceful farmers and expected them to stay peaceful. He had killed children and expected their parents to surrender. He had poked a sleeping beast and expected it to stay asleep. All ships, he ordered, his voice suddenly uncertain. Battle stations. But even as his fleet scrambled to prepare, even as his commanders shouted orders and his crews rushed to their positions, Kethris knew the truth. The hunt was over. The prey had become the predator, and the Velthari were no longer the hunters. The battle for the Korath system would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. It was the moment when everything changed. It was the moment when the universe learned what humanity had been hiding behind its peaceful smile. Admiral Henry Cole stood on the bridge of the UN's Retribution. Watching the Velthari fleet scramble into defensive formations, they were good, he had to admit. Their ships moved with discipline and precision. Their commanders clearly knew what they were doing. It would not save them. All ships, Cole said calmly, begin attack, run. The human fleet surged forward like a wave of darkness. The Nemesis-class dreadnoughts led the charge, their massive forms absorbing fire that should have torn them apart. Behind them came the cruisers, launching volleys of missiles that filled the space between the fleets with streaks of light. And weaving through it all were the destroyers, small and fast and impossibly aggressive. Commander Lisa Grant sat in the captain's chair of the Nemesis, her hands steady on the controls despite the chaos erupting around her. Enemy fire slammed into her ship's shields. Alarms wailed. Officers shouted reports and damage assessments. Through it all, she kept her voice calm. Target the lead cruiser, she ordered. All batteries, fire at will. The Nemesis spoke with a voice of thunder. Railguns sent metal projectiles screaming through space at unimaginable speeds. Missile tubes emptied themselves in waves of destruction. Energy weapons carved lines of fire through the darkness. The Velthari cruiser lasted approximately 4 seconds. Next target, Lisa said. Keep moving. Do not give them time to adjust. Across the battlefield, the story repeated itself again and again. The Velthari fought bravely. They fought skillfully. But they had prepared for enemies that fought like they did, enemies that valued survival, enemies that would retreat when the battle turned against them. Humans did not retreat. Destroyer called the Swift Justice took a direct hit that tore open her hull. Rather than pulling back, her captain accelerated toward the nearest Velthari ship and detonated his reactor at point-blank range. Destroying both vessels in a ball of fire, a cruiser named the Righteous Fury found herself surrounded by enemy fighters. Her point defense systems failed. Her shields collapsed. Her captain, a woman named Betty Chen, broadcast one final message before she went down. "Remember New Eden?" Then she aimed her dying ship at the Vel-3 command vessel and pushed, engines to maximum. The Vel-3 commanders did not understand. Their tactical models did not account for an enemy willing to die as long as they took their killers with them. They expected humans to fight like civilized beings, to value their lives above victory. They were wrong. Admiral Cole watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The Vel-3 fleet was crumbling. Ships that had seemed invincible hours ago were now burning wreckage. Formations that had been perfect were now chaos. "All ships, push forward," he ordered. "No retreats. No surrender." They wanted to see what humanity is capable of. Let us show them. On the surface of Korath Prime, a Vel-3-occupied world, a different kind of battle was unfolding. Human Marines landed in drop pods that screamed through the atmosphere like angry meteors. They hit the ground running, their powered armor making them look like monsters from some ancient nightmare. Each suit was painted with names, hundreds of names written in small letters across every surface. The names of the dead from New Eden. Sergeant Carlos Mendez led his squad through the burning streets of a Vel-3 garrison city. His rifle spoke in short, precise bursts. Enemy soldiers fell before him. Buildings that harbored resistance were marked for orbital strikes. "Contact left," one of his soldiers reported. "Looks like a command post." Carlos nodded. "Hit it hard. No survivors unless they surrender." They did not surrender. The Vel-3 inside the command post fought until the last soldier fell. Carlos found their commander dying in a corner, clutching a wound that no amount of medicine could heal. "Why?" The Vel-3 officer gasped. "Why do you fight like this? You are merchants, farmers. You should be surrendering." Carlos knelt beside the dying officer. He thought about the footage from New Eden. He thought about the children he had seen running through streets that melted beneath their feet. He thought about a 7-year-old girl named Sophie Murphy who had wanted to be a pilot. "You killed our children," Carlos said quietly. "Did you think we would forgive that?" The officer died without answering. Carlos stood and looked at his squad. They were all tired. They were all wounded in some way. But in their eyes, he saw something that made the Vel-3 look away in fear. "Next objective," Carlos said. "Move out." In orbit, the battle was ending. The Vel-3 fleet, once proud and undefeated, was shattered. Ships drifted without power. Escape pods filled the space between burning hulks. Kethris himself had been forced to abandon the Eternal Claw. When human Marines breached her hull, Admiral Cole surveyed the destruction and felt no joy. Only duty. Only the cold satisfaction of protecting his people. "Broadcast to all surviving Vel-3 vessels," he ordered. "Surrender now, and you will be treated according to the conventions of war. Continue fighting, and you will be destroyed." Most of the survivors surrendered. A few tried to run. They did not get far. Within a week, human fleets had pushed deep into Vel-3 territory. Colony after colony fell. Not to orbital bombardment, not to genocide. The humans were not monsters. But the military installations were destroyed. The weapons factories were reduced to rubble. The fleets that had terrorized human space were hunted down and eliminated with mechanical precision. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. This was not the humanity they knew. This was not the peaceful species that sent diplomats and trade delegations. This was something else entirely. Something old. Something terrifying. On Earth, President Maria Santos received updates every hour. The war was going well. Better than anyone had expected. The Vel-3 were breaking faster than the most optimistic projections, but she found no joy in the reports. Each victory meant more death. Each advance meant more destruction. Humanity was winning, but the cost was being measured in blood. "We need to end this quickly," she told her advisors, "before we become the thing we are fighting against." They nodded in agreement. They all understood the danger. Humanity had kept its violent nature chained for 200 years. Now that chain was broken. The longer the war continued, the harder it would be to put the beast back to sleep. "Push for the capital," Santos ordered. "Force them to surrender. Then we rebuild, both them and ourselves." The orders went out. The fleet adjusted course. The final battle was coming, and somewhere in the ruins of the Korth system, floating in an escape pod among the wreckage of his flagship, Admiral Kethros finally understood the truth. Humanity had not become peaceful because they were weak. They had become peaceful because they knew what they were capable of. They had chosen to be gentle because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate, and he had forced them to contemplate it: the Velthari. Capital World had no name in human languages. The Velthari simply called it home. It was a beautiful world, covered in forests and mountains and seas that sparkled under twin suns. For 10,000 years, it had been the heart of an empire that stretched across Hu. And dreads of star systems, now it burned. Human dropships descended through smoke-filled skies, carrying Marines who had fought their way across a dozen worlds to reach this moment. Orbital platforms that had protected the planet for millennia were now wreckage drifting in space. The great fleet that had once made the Velthari, the masters of this region of the galaxy, was scattered and destroyed. Admiral Kethros stood in the ruins of the Imperial Palace, watching the human ships land. His scales were dull and cracked, his once-proud uniform torn and dirty. Around him, the remnants of his guard waited, with weapons they knew were useless. He had survived the destruction of his fleet. He had made it back to the homeworld. He had tried to rally the remaining forces for a final defense. But there was nothing left to rally. The humans had been thorough. Every military installation, every weapons factory, every ship capable of fighting back had been eliminated with cold, methodical precision. Admiral Henry Cole walked through the rubble to meet him. The human looked tired. Deep lines marked his face, and his eyes held the weight of everything he had ordered done. Behind him walked Marines in powered armor, their weapons ready but not raised. "It is over," Cole said simply. Kethros nodded slowly. There was nothing left to say. The war had lasted 6 months. In that time, the Velthari had gone from conquerors to conquered. Everything they had built over thousands of years had been swept away by creatures they had dismissed as weak. "You could have had peace," Cole continued. "We offered friendship, trade, cooperation. We wanted nothing from your empire except to be left alone." "You were weak," Kethros replied. The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Cole shook his head. "We were hopeful. There is a difference. We hoped that the universe could be better than it is. We hoped that species could live alongside each other without violence. We spent 200 years trying to prove that hope was justified." He looked up at the burning sky. "Humans are not peaceful by nature, Admiral. We are predators. Our history is written in blood. We fought each other for thousands of years before we finally learned to work together. When we reached the stars, we made a choice. We decided to be better than we had been. We decided to put away our weapons and extend our hands in friendship." Cole met Kethros' eyes. "But we never forgot what we are. We never lost the ability to fight. We simply chose not to. And when you attacked our colonies, when you killed our children, you reminded us of everything we had tried to leave behind." The surrender ceremony took place that evening in the ruins of the Senate chamber. Representatives of the Velthari government signed documents agreeing to pay reparations, return all occupied territories, and submit to 20 years of military oversight. Their empire, which had dominated this region of space for millennia, was reduced to a shadow of its former glory. Grace Murphy was recovered from a Velthari prison ship 3 days later. She was thin and weak, her body showing signs of the hardships she had endured. But she was alive. When the medics told her the war was over, that humanity had won, she did not cheer. She simply asked for a quiet room where she could sleep. She dreamed of her sister Sophie. In the dream, they were both on New Eden, lying in a field of wheat and watching clouds drift across a blue sky. Sophie was laughing, pointing at a cloud that looked like a rabbit. Grace held her hand and promised that she would always keep her safe. When she woke up, her face was wet with tears. On Earth, President Santos addressed humanity one final time as the war concluded. "We did not want this conflict," she said. "We never wanted to become what we became. Every life lost in this war, human and Velthari alike, represents a failure of diplomacy, a failure of hope, a failure of the peaceful future we tried to build." She paused. "But I will not apologize for defending our people. I will not apologize for fighting back when our children were murdered. The Velthari made their choice when they attacked New Eden. We made ours when we refused to accept extinction." Her voice softened. "Now comes the harder work. Rebuilding what was destroyed, healing what was wounded, finding a way to be peaceful again after we have remembered how to make war." She looked directly into the camera. "To any who would threaten humanity in the future, I offer this warning. We keep our weapons hidden because we choose to, not because we have none. We pursue peace because we value it, not because we cannot fight. Mistake our kindness for weakness at your own peril." The reconstruction of New Eden began within weeks of the war's end. Workers cleared the rubble of destroyed cities. Engineers planned new buildings. Farmers prepared the soil for new crops. The world that had been burned was slowly coming back to life. In the central square of the largest settlement, a memorial was erected. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone bearing the names of every person who had died in the attack. 12 million names carved in letters small enough that the wall stretched for kilometers. At the base of the wall, a single inscription. They asked for peace and were given war. They answered with thunder. May this never be necessary again. Grace Murphy visited the memorial on its first anniversary. She found her sister's name and traced the letters with her fingers. Sophie Murphy, age 7. One name among millions. One child among an ocean of loss. She stood there until the sun set, then walked back to her shuttle. She had been offered any posting she wanted after the war. She had chosen to teach at the academy, helping train the next generation of pilots. Not warriors, she hoped. Just pilots. People who would carry cargo and passengers and mail between the stars. People who would never have to fight, but also people who could fight if they had to, because that was the lesson humanity had learned. Peace was precious. Peace was the goal. But peace only survived if someone, somewhere, remembered how to defend it. In the depths of Titan, the Ghost Fleet returned to its hidden berths. The dreadnoughts powered down. The cruisers went silent. The destroyers settled into their racks to wait. Maybe forever. Maybe just until the next time. Admiral Cole retired to a small house on Earth. Overlooking an ocean that sparkled in the sunlight, he spent his days gardening and reading books and trying not to think about the things he had done. Some nights he slept peacefully. Other nights the ghosts came. Commander Lisa Grant took command of a new ship, a passenger liner that carried families between colony worlds. She liked the work. She liked seeing children playing in the observation decks, watching stars drift past. She liked being part of something that built rather than destroyed. Humanity returned to its peaceful existence. Farmers farmed. Teachers taught. Scientists studied the mysteries of the universe. Diplomats extended hands in friendship to new species, hoping each time that this one would be different, that this one would understand. But deep down, in their blood and their bones, humans remembered. They remembered what they were capable of. They remembered the beast that slept within them. And they kept it chained, not because they were weak, because they were strong enough to choose peace. The Velthari learned this lesson the hard way. Other species watched and noted and quietly adjusted their diplomatic approaches to humanity. The soft creatures who farmed planets and signed treaties were not prey after all. They were wolves who had chosen to live as shepherds. And wolves, once awakened, never truly went back to sleep. They simply waited, watching the flock, ready to bare their teeth if anyone was foolish enough to threaten what they protected. That was the truth the galaxy learned. In the fires of the human Velthari War, that was the legacy of New Eden. That was the answer to the question no one had thought to. Ask what happens when you attack humanity's colonies. You awaken the beast, and the beast never forgets.